With few natural resources, weak borders, and a host of formidable neighbors, the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan holds a delicate seat in a region known for its volatility. Such factors have resulted in severe socio-economic constraints, yet, strangely enough, the ruling government has not seen the type of conflict that many of its neighbors have experienced. By focusing on a nuanced foreign policy that emphasizes the need for strong international ties, Jordan navigates the complex geopolitical waters of the Middle East and maintains stability whilst doing so. I'm your host Shivan and welcome to Caspian Report. Today's episode is made possible by NordVPN. If you want to reduce your digital footprint, check out NordVPN. It's affordable, user-friendly, and it works on mobile devices as well. Go to nordvpn.com/Caspian Report and use the promo code Caspian Report to get a discount on the premium version. The Kingdom of Jordan has been dealt a bad hand. It's almost entirely landlocked, contains few rivers, and around 75% of its territory is comprised of desert. It's no surprise therefore that the country has historically accounted for low agricultural output and small population centers. For much of Jordanian history, the area acted as a transit hub. Merchants, nomads, and Bedouin tribes would cross the deserts towards coastal cities like Tripoli and Jaffa. While some cities in the periphery developed, much of Jordan remained sparsely populated and lacked wealth. The most significant geographical feature is the Jordan River Valley, which extends from the Sea of Galilee in the north to the Dead Sea in the south. Most of Jordan's 10 million citizens reside in the northern portion of the valley by the adjacent highland plateaus. The country's largest cities, Irbid and Zarqa, as well as the capital Amman, are all located in this area, just a few kilometers away from the river's banks. It is in the Jordan Valley where the country's major economic sectors and industries operate. The east bank of the Jordan River is also the site of agricultural production and hosts crops like olives, tobacco, etc., all of which rely on the irrigation channels deriving from the Jordan River. But beyond the valley, much of the land is barren. The deserts to the east and northeast open into vast empty spaces that hold no significant population centers. There are no arable or agricultural sites elsewhere in the country. Jordan also holds few natural resources. While the country does export products like calcium phosphates and fertilizers, these goods make up less than 15% of its GDP. Plus, unlike its neighbors, Jordan has little to no natural gas or crude oil deposits, and most goods destined for export markets must move to the country's only seaport, the city of Aqaba, located by the Red Sea, which sits well outside the Jordan Valley heartland. All these geographical factors have resulted in a shaky socio-economic situation. Jordan's lack of natural wealth has forced the state to import a vast majority of its goods. Energy, like natural gas, accounts for about 25% of the country's imports, while in 2018 the government spent about $265 million to import wheat. Basically, the lack of natural resources has hampered the development of a robust industrial sector. Moreover, Jordan's small population, a problem directly related to low agricultural output, means that the country cannot export labor and bolster its economic fortunes through remittances in a manner similar to its neighbors like Egypt. Poverty seems to be embedded into the Jordanian geography. Although the state has attempted to diversify its economic situation through less resource-dependent industries, such as in finance, pharmaceuticals, and tourism, these initiatives have only stemmed part of the bleeding. Currently, Jordan faces low GDP growth, an unemployment rate of at least 19%, and a poverty rate between 10 and 15%, which affects more than 1 million individuals. While these domestic issues are troubling for the Jordanian government, they are only one side of the political nightmare brought about by the country's geography. When looking at the map, Jordan's security situation is dreadful. Straddling the road between Africa, Asia, and Europe, Jordan was and remains vulnerable to foreign movements and conquering powers. Empires like the Egyptians and Babylonians waged wars over the Jordan Valley, while the region's proximity to holy sites like Jerusalem and Hebron made it a vital area of control for the Crusaders, the Mamluks, and the Ottomans. With World War I, the area became a contested region between the imperial powers of France and the United Kingdom, and Jordan's current borders reflect those colonial designs. The Sykes-Picot Agreement of 1916 drew arbitrary borders that plague Jordan today. Nowhere is this more evident than in the country's eastern provinces, a rectangular area of the Syrian desert that neighbors Iraq, Syria, and Saudi Arabia. Here, the country's borders are somewhat invisible on the ground, as indigenous nomadic communities crisscross national lines. The lack of geographic boundaries and the size of the area makes the eastern flank of Jordan a security concern. The area is entirely desert, relatively flat, and easy to traverse. An army pushing from Iraq would cross a mere 450 kilometers of sand dunes and small hills before reaching the Jordanian capital, a vulnerability with historical precedents. After the pro-Nasserist coup in Iraq in 1958, Jordan found itself surrounded by belligerent neighbors from the Iraqi and Syrian flanks. Jordanian lawmakers recognized that they were virtually isolated. But that's not all. An equally daunting security vacuum exists by Jordan's western border with Israel. The relationship between Jordan and Israel is sketchy, and it's primarily defined by the larger Arab-Israeli conflict. In this context, the Jordan River acts as a natural border with Israel and the Palestinian territories, though it fails to act as a durable deterrent. On the average, the Jordan River has a width of 20 to 30 meters, with many shallow areas spread interchangeably. Israel's close proximity to the Jordan Valley, coupled with the relative ease of crossing the river, make for a tense security dilemma to the government in Amman. In the past, when Jordan still controlled the territories of the West Bank, Amman had a buffer that could delay Israeli forces from advancing onto the Jordan Valley. The necessity of this buffer became clear during the Six-Day War in 1967. Fighting in Jerusalem and Nablus bogged Israeli forces for days and prevented Jordan from collapsing completely. Now, however, with the loss of the West Bank as a buffer, Israel is in striking distance of the Jordanian heartland. That said, Israel has always kept an eye on Jordanian affairs, seeking to maintain the monarchy's stability in fear of a popular Palestinian uprising. The thing is, the ruling Hashemite monarchy originates from the Arabian Peninsula, while more than half of Jordan's current population is ethnic Palestinian, with the remainder being descendants of the local Bedouin Arab tribes. So Israel and the Hashemite rulers of Jordan have an understanding regarding the Palestinians. The two reluctantly prefer enforcing the status quo over the many unknowns of a Palestinian state. During the events of Black September in 1970, when Palestinian and Syrian fighters attempted to overthrow the Hashemite king Hussein, Israel put its air force on alert and flew over Syrian forces in an act of deterrence. In the days leading up to the Yom Kippur War in 1973, King Hussein tried to covertly assist Israeli Prime Minister Golda Meir, despite overt support for the Arab forces. As a result, the current relationship between Israel and Jordan is hard to pin down. In a way, the two are frenemies. Each dislikes the other, but at the same time rely on one another. In that spirit, the 1994 peace treaty created former diplomatic ties between the two nations, even though politicians in both countries continued to condemn each other. Today, Jordan's primary security predicaments come from the ongoing conflicts in the periphery. The Syrian conflict, fighters belonging to ISIS, and the flow of migrants and refugees are just a few issues that Jordanian policymakers face. Yet despite all the security and domestic complications, Jordan is a beacon of stability in an otherwise volatile landscape. How did this come to be? The answer lies in the country's deficit spending. Amman employs a large amount of its cash flow to provide social services and subsidies to many civilians, programs that are relatively common among many Arab monarchies. However, unlike its oil-rich Arab neighbors, Jordan is cash poor. So the state routinely loans from international organizations like the IMF. Most recently, in January 2020, Jordan borrowed $1.3 billion to curb unemployment and poverty, which brought the total public debt to $42 billion. That is a significant amount of money for a small state. All in all, Jordan has an imposing geopolitical environment, and its national interests can be refined to the following objectives. First, the state must press on to develop its national identity. Although Jordan has been able to avoid sectarian conflicts seen in its neighbors, it must continue to find ways to unite its divergent populations. In particular, the split between the Palestinians and the Bedouin groups remains an ever-present wedge. So Amman must focus on national unity to keep the king's peace. Fiscal stability, thanks to the practice of international loans, helps to smoothen national unity. The second objective for Jordan is to secure its borders by maintaining competent security capabilities. Related to this is the ever-looming presence of Israel. Jordan's role here is crucial. It cannot shy away from the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Hence, to secure its western border and to further strengthen its internal unity, Jordan must continue navigating the turbulent waters of this decades-long conflict. Though Jordanian policymakers command little influence in the Palestinian territories, considering the size and reach of the Jordanian Palestinian community, the legitimacy of the ruling Hashemite monarchy depends on its role in addressing the Palestinian question with Israel. Equally important for Jordan is the need to find international partners. Here, Jordan's wider geographical position, something noted earlier as being a liability, is also the country's greatest asset. For those with a vested interest in maintaining global hydrocarbon supplies, Jordan is in close proximity to Saudi Arabia and the other Gulf states. For nations looking to keep regional powers in check, the Jordanian state is positioned perfectly in striking distance. Simply put, Jordan is a handsome ally for many foreign governments. Therefore, Amman must turn its geographical liability into its primary means of leverage to gather international support and influence. The clearest manifestation of this has been in Jordan's relationship with the United States. Throughout the Cold War, Jordan was a steadfast partner in the American camp. Even today, Jordan is the third largest recipient of US foreign aid, just after Afghanistan and Israel. However, Jordan cannot rely solely on the United States, so it must seek for additional partners to enhance the flexibility of its foreign policy. And that's exactly what Jordanian lawmakers have been doing since the Syrian conflict, with Amman and Moscow working closely on issues such as transportation, renewable energy, security, etc. Similar discussions are now being held with China, with Amman and Beijing having agreed to a major trade agreement in 2018 valued at least $3 billion. This balancing act between great powers is a subtle policy. Jordan can only cooperate with nations that are not openly hostile with each other. So reaching out to Iran would backfire, as it would raise suspicions in Israel and Saudi Arabia. Meanwhile, China and Russia are deemed as more acceptable partners by the immediate neighbors. So it's a delicate policy. And as controversial as this policy sounds, without it, Jordan would be reduced to isolated insignificance. So isolation is not an option. There are just too many insecurities, and the kingdom does not have the means to meet the needs of its citizens on its own, so it needs to reach out and connect with the world, even if that asserts the notion that Jordan is not an agent of its own destiny, but a recipient of the geopolitical needs of others. I've been your host Shirvan from Caspian Report. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like, comment and subscribe. Thank you for watching, and so on.